Hey everybody, I'm Sean. Welcome back to Somm Wine Club, and I have got some wine for you. This is the 2013 Viña Cubillo from López de Heredia, one of Rioja's most historic and important wineries. But before we talk about the history of the winery, I want to go back just a little further, back to the 1850s. In the late 1850s, something happened in Europe that changed the course of wine forever. It was a grape louse, a vine louse called phylloxera. It landed in the south of France, or was first recorded in the south of France in the late 1850s, and by the 1860s had spread to a lot of the country. Now, at that time, one of the most important wine regions of France was Bordeaux. And Bordeaux winemakers saw what was coming. They saw the impact that the phylloxera louse was having on vineyards around the country. So, rather than just letting it destroy their livelihoods, they decided to go south. They went to northern Spain, to Rioja, and invested heavily in the region in order to maintain an ability to create wine while they figured out what to do about this louse. Now, in the 1860s, Rioja was still not particularly established as a wine region. There's a history of winemaking in the region from back in Roman times, but when the Moors controlled Spain, that basically wiped out any production of wine. And it wasn't until Bordeaux winemakers and French winemakers came back to Spain in the 1860s that wine production really started to take off again. Now, at this time, there was a young man named Don Rafael López de Heredia y Landeta, and he saw what was going on with the French. He was inspired by what they were doing, by the techniques that they were using, long barrel aging for their red wines, and traditional techniques of winemaking that he learned from the Bordelais. So in 1877, he started construction of the winery which would then be known as Viña López de Heredia. It was the first winery that was built in the town of Haro, which is considered the center, the heart of the Rioja region, and one of the three oldest wineries in the region completely. Now, with that little piece of history out of the way, why, when talking about Rioja, is it so important to understand the history of López de Heredia? Because they're considered maybe the most traditional winery in the region. They still produce wine like they did back in the 1870s. Egg white fining while racking the barrels, which is when you take the egg whites and basically use them to pull out small particulate matter that's in the wine, in the barrels, while they're racking them from one barrel to the other. They age their wines for an incredibly long time. This is the 2013, which is their youngest wine. The red Grand Reserves, I think, are on the 1995 vintage right now, which gives you an idea of just how long these wines are held back at the winery before they're released. So the Viña Cubillo, which is a Crianza level, the youngest level of certification for aging in Rioja, it's a minimum of 1 year in barrel, and I think it's 3 years total before it can be released. This would actually qualify as a Grand Reserva because it spends 3 years in barrel, where a regular Grand Reserva only needs to spend 2 years in barrel and a total of 5 years of aging. So this was bottled in May of 2019, which would mean that the wine spent 6 years, or almost 6 years, aging at the winery, 3 of which was in barrel. So an incredible thing for them to do, to dedicate to producing these wines in the style that they want to. So 2013, a very difficult year in Rioja. One of the coolest and wettest years that they had had in a long time. They had to discard 100,000 kilograms of grapes, and the production of most of their wines was a lot lower. So it was even more impressive that they were able to make a wine of this quality in such a challenging vintage. It was also the year that the patriarch of the estate, Pedro López de Heredia, passed away. So his children, Maria Jose, Mercedes, and Julio, were even more inspired to produce a really high quality Rioja for the 2013 vintage. So that's what we have in the box for this month. Let's taste it and let's talk about why this wine tastes the way that it does. Or even just smells, rather. Rioja, to me, and traditional Rioja especially, always has a really strong kind of imagery to it. It creates this kind of picture in your mind when you smell it. And it's one of my funnest kind of images to kind of describe to people when I'm talking about wine. Traditional classic Rioja with age to it smells like you've thrown mashed cherries and dried tobacco into a leather bag, a well-worn leather bag, and then chucked it down a hill. Don't know why, that's always been the thing that sticks with me, but there's so much of this juicy dried cherry, dry herbs, leather, spice, crushed stone, wet earth. There's a very slight undertone of kind of baking spice, but this is not a wine that smells like coconut sunscreen. You get a lot of Rioja that spends time in new American oak, and it pulls out all those coconut and dill flavors. And while this does have oak character, it's not so pronounced when combined with all of the other flavors. Now, being that this is 2013, almost 10 years old at this point, there is going to be a little bit of sediment in the bottle. So before opening it, I would advise you to stand it up for a day or two. If you want to stand it up, just put it on the counter, let it sit, let all that sediment kind of fall to the bottom. It'll be much easier for you to open it gently and decant it, and that way you can leave whatever little sediment is left in the bottle, rather than having it end up in your wine. So I had this standing up before I put the Corvin in it and pulled some juice out, so I'm not concerned about sediment in the glass. But you can't really see from the camera, but this wine is elegant. It's pale. It has just this kind of hint of orange color to the ruby core of the wine. And yeah, it smells lightly mature, not fully mature. There's still lots of fruit. There's lots of spice. And the tannins are still pronounced. You still feel that grip. The best thing I think about the Cubillo is, and López de Heredia's wines in general, is how zesty and vibrant they are. Rioja can be quite opulent and heavy. It's a warm growing region, but their techniques, the grape variety blending that they do, this is not 100% Tempranillo. It's only 65% Tempranillo. Garnacha, Mazuelo, and Graciano make up the balance of the wine. So you have all of these components working together rather than competing against each other and competing against the other flavors in the wine. Sour cherry. It has this almost like tangy cranberry crunch to it, and some of that's coming from vintage, being that 2013 was the coolest vintage that they had had in a long time, only really saved by some warmer weather in September and October. This is about as old school and classic tasting as you can get for Rioja, and especially for López de Heredia. So I hope that you appreciate this. The history of this wine is so important, and understanding that bit of it before you taste and knowing why it tastes the way that it does is really important to appreciation and to understanding. There's a whole big world out there. López de Heredia is part of it, especially in Rioja, and I am happy to be able to share that with everybody this month. So thank you very much. We'll see you all next time.